I hope that Senate Republicans will not filibuster this bill. At some point in time, the majority ought to rule. Now, the Second Amendment correctly protects gun ownership. I don't have an argument with that. But the Supreme Court itself said that there can be responsible restraints and items for protection consistent with that amendment. That's what this bill does. I hope our friends will listen to the voices of parents, children, siblings, spouses, neighbors, and friends of those who were killed by gun violence in recent years. And I hope they'll remember the names and bring tears to many eyes and pain in so many hearts. Parkland. Now, some believe Parkland didn't happen. They're wrong, of course. Sandy Hook, Charleston, Las Vegas, Orlando, Pittsburgh, Annapolis, San Bernardino, Washington Navy Yard, just a few blocks from here, Oak Creek, Tucson, Virginia Tech, and the list could go on and on and on. Ladies and gentlemen of the House, let's not add more names to this register of grief. Let's not rely on a pandemic to do what we ought to have done so long ago. Let's pass these bills and reduce gun violence the right way with our votes. Is this a perfect bill? Will it establish or accomplish the absolute safety? It will not. But what 90% of Americans say is it's a step in the right direction. Mr. Speaker, let us take that step, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields. The gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
No, it does, Mr. Speaker. No, it doesn't. The gentleman, the previous speaker, said this bill becomes law, it'll stop some of the mass shootings, all the mass shootings that happen in this country. No, it won't. Nothing in this bill would have stopped any of those terrible things that took place. What this bill does is stop law-abiding citizens from exercising their Second Amendment liberties, just as the gentleman from Kentucky mentioned a few minutes ago. I would yield 1 minute to the gentlelady from Indiana, Ms. Sparks.
Mr. Speaker, I rise in opposition to H.R. 8. A major reason our founding fathers drafted the Second Amendment is to have a check and balance for the people against the tyranny of government. It is the Second Amendment for a reason, not the 9th or 10th. You must have the second to protect the first. The first action by history dictators, and we know all of them, was to take guns from law-abiding citizens. We must remember that there is no law that stops criminals from getting guns or committing crimes. We would have empty prisons otherwise. As someone who grew up under a tyrannical government, I value these rights tremendously, and it helped these rights a lot of Americans to have equality and freedoms. And I encourage my colleagues to be vigilant and protect these rights for all law-abiding Americans. I urge my colleagues to oppose this bill, and I yield back.
Gentleman from Ohio reserves. Gentleman from recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I now yield 3 minutes to the distinguished sponsor of this bill, the distinguished gentleman from California, Mr. Thompson.
Gentleman from California is recognized.
Thank the gentleman for yielding. You know, every day 30 people are killed by someone using a gun. That number jumps to 100 if you factor in accidents and suicides involving guns. The steady stream of gun violence devastates families, communities, and schools. Gun violence costs our country $280 billion every year. This status quo is not okay. Our constituents know it, and they support H.R. 8 overwhelmingly. The special order last night on H.R. 8 was another low point for decorum in the House. To be generous, it was an embarrassing display and a complete misrepresentation of the facts. Viewers were told that the bill would create a federal gun registry. Wrong. Read page 5, line 18. H.R. 8 prohibits any registry. They were told that you can't give a gun to a family member. Wrong. Read page 3, line 7. You can. They were told that you can't transfer a gun if someone was suicidal or needed it for protection to address a self-defense situation. Wrong. Read page 3, line 21. You can. They were told that you can't lend a gun to a friend to go hunting. Wrong. Read page 4, line 16. You can. What the bill does do is close the private gun sale loophole, which has made it easy for felons and other prohibited purchasers to buy a gun online, at gun shows, or in person-to-person sales. We know universal background checks work. Every day they stop some 160 felons and some 50 domestic abusers from buying a gun. Every day. But without universal background checks, these people can take their business elsewhere, to someone without a federal firearms license, and buy the same gun. I've personally filled out the 4473 form required to buy a gun from a licensed dealer. I've done it many times. It's something that every responsible gun owner should be able to live with. Heck, they should welcome it because it helps stop dangerous individuals from getting a gun. In 90% of the cases, background checks are completed within minutes. Mr. Speaker, I ask that these letters that I have from dozens of gun violence prevention groups, healthcare workers, law enforcement, and others be made part of the record. On the bill, we have co-authors who are Democrats and Republicans, cops, hunters, gun owners, district attorneys, a former FBI agent, and veterans who have served in combat and put their lives on the line to protect our Second Amendment. There's bipartisan support for universal background checks in Congress and near universal support for background checks from the American people. I urge my colleagues to vote yes on H.R. 8, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Without objection, the materials will be entered into the record.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Georgia, a minute and a half to the gentleman from Georgia, Mr.
The gentleman from Georgia is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank my good friend from Ohio. Look, bottom line is we all know that by definition, criminals don't abide by the law. And that applies also when they are purchasing firearms. Nothing in this bill prohibits this type of individual from obtaining firearms. In fact, the majority of individuals in prison for committing crimes with firearms obtain their firearms through theft, the underground market, family members, and the like. But what this bill does is threaten everyday American citizens with up to a year in prison and a $100,000 fine for exercising their Second Amendment right and doing common practices. This is, and to say that this does not create a national gun registry, you cannot accomplish what's in this bill without a gun registry. The reality is universal background checks do not stop mass shootings. We do not have mass shootings because of a lack of background checks. This bill will not make our communities safer. In fact, what it will do is cause law-abiding citizens to lose more of their Second Amendment rights. We shouldn't be focused here in Congress in taking those rights away. We actually should be strengthening the enforcement of laws we already have to make our communities safer. I stand with the Constitution and urge my colleagues to vote against H.R. 8, and I yield back.
Gentleman from Ohio reserves. Gentleman from New York is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, the fact is that 160 felons every day buy guns. All this bill does is to say that people who buy guns, who obtain guns from unlicensed dealers as well as licensed dealers must be subject to the background check, and that will save a heck of a lot of lives. I now yield 2 minutes to the distinguished gentlelady from Texas, Ms. Jackson Lee.
Gentleman from Houston is recognized.
I thank the gentleman very much. You know, our friends on the other side of the aisle are deadly wrong. That's the tragedy of their argument, because the Second Amendment does not prohibit regulation. It never did. And our founding fathers regulated guns as early as the beginning of this nation. And so I rise in support of H.R. 8 and indicate why the COVID-19 pandemic dominated news headlines in 2020, the number of shootings surged in many communities across America. Our public health and emergency resources have been straining to respond from the coronavirus. Budgets are crunched nationwide, and as well, gun violence is rising. It's important to note because approximately 80% of firearms used for criminal purposes are obtained without a background check. We must strengthen our firearms background checks and close dangerous gaps such as the online sale and gun show loopholes. In the data that we were able to secure, there was nearly one mass shooting per day in the United States, 355 mass shootings in 2018. We realized that since December 2012, there have been at least 1,518 mass shootings with at least 1,715 people killed. Each day, an average 92 Americans are victims of gun violence, resulting in more than 33,000 deaths. And I wonder why our friends could not feel the pain of the loss of guns being transferred illegally or improperly. I was here for Columbine. That happened on April 20th, 1999. High school students losing their lives. I was here when babies were killed in Newtown, Connecticut, December 12th, 2012. I was here in the United States Congress each moment we tried to pass sensible gun legislation like H.R. 8. Thanking you, Chairman Thompson, for your leadership, and Chairman Nadler. On February 14, 2018, I was here for Parkland and look at these. And as well, I was here on May 18th in Santa Fe, Texas, when people died. It is time to pass H.R. 8. Stop seeing our children die.
Gentlewoman's time has expired. Gentleman from New York reserves. Gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield a minute and a half to the gentleman from Utah, Mr. Owens.
Gentleman from Utah is recognized.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, I rise today in opposition to H.R. 8 and H.R. 1446. In this last week, I received over 1,000 emails from constituents in strong opposition to these anti-gun bills. Here's a sample. H.R. 8 will make it impossible to sell or loan guns to my relatives and trusted friends. These bills appear designed to impose restrictions on natural rights guaranteed by the U.S. Constitution. And finally, stand up for our rights and oppose these measures with every tool in your grasp. I absolutely will fight these measures with every tool in my grasp. These rights protect my life, liberty, and property were granted to me by God and cannot be taken away from me by D.C. bureaucrats. I grew up in the Deep South at a time when black Americans were unable to defend themselves. After the Civil War, black codes and Jim Crow laws prohibited people of color from owning firearms. In mid-1950s, Martin Luther King Jr. kept firearms for self-protection, but his application for concealed weapon permit was denied because of racist gun control laws in his state. As a child, my dad witnessed an altercation between his father and a southern white man who thought my grandfather was being disrespectful and threatened to teach him a lesson. Later that night, he drove up to my grandfather's home with a bunch of his friends, standing on the forerunner of a Model T Ford. My grandfather was prepared. He and his brothers had hidden around his front porch, and as these bullies and cowards approached the house, they heard the click of rifles and left as fast as they came. Without firing his gun on another human being, my grandfather's right to own a firearm ensured his rights to protect his life, liberty, and property. I urge my colleagues to vote against these anti-Second Amendment bills. Thank you, and I yield back.
Gentleman from Ohio reserves. Gentleman from New York is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I now yield 1 minute to the distinguished gentleman from California, Mr. Swalwell.
Gentleman from California is recognized.
I thank Mr. Thompson for this legislation because it takes the most dangerous weapons out of the hands of the most dangerous people. I've heard from my colleagues on the other side of the aisle about rights. Let's talk about some other rights in this country, like the right to pray in church, the right to dance at a party, the right to come home from a concert, the right to come back home safely and alive. Those are rights that matter too. And I am for this because I think about a mother who told me a couple years ago to keep fighting on this issue because every day when she puts her children in the car and sends them off to school, before they get out of the car, she closes her eyes to remember what they were wearing because she was afraid that one day she may have to identify them. This bill says we don't have to live that way anymore. The right to come home alive is greater than any right that is being put forward by the other side. And I yield back.
Goes back to the gentleman from Ohio.
Mr. Speaker, I yield a minute and a half to the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Gomer.
Gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We've been told that 90% of Americans support this bill. Well, that's because 99.99% of Americans have not read this bill. And we're told yet again that this will save lives. And yet, There is not one single mass killing that's been brought up here today that would have been prevented by this bill. And yet, over and over, we have people come in here. Usually they mean well. Look, this will protect people, when the fact is that they can't point to any of these mass killings they talk about that would have been prevented. So let's talk about lives that would be saved. Think about the people that are shot every day, and would their situation be different if they were not having it so difficult to legally get a gun? I mean, I think we had thousands of cases, felony cases, that came through my court, and we tried a lot of those cases. Over and over, you hear the criminals, they're not obeying the law. They're not going to follow the law. They got their guns illegally. And this will not change at all any of those people we tried and convicted for getting guns. They steal them. They buy them from other people that stole them. They don't obey the law. That's why they're criminals. So quit penalizing the American people. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Maryland.
Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman from New York. I'm sorry, Mr. Raskin.
I yield
Yes.
1 minute to the distinguished gentleman from Maryland, Mr. Raskin.
The gentleman from Maryland is now recognized.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. Americans are 25 times more likely to die from gun violence than people who live in other developed countries. And on that point, our perpetually outraged and indignant colleagues have absolutely nothing to say. We lose 38,000 people a year, more than 100 people a day. From Newtown, Connecticut to El Paso, Texas, gun violence is ripping the heart out of our social contract, making life for Americans nasty, poor, solitary, brutish, and short, a Hobbesian state of war. H.R. 8 will close 3 gaping loopholes in the law: the gun show loophole, the internet loophole, and the private sale loophole, cutting down precisely on the traffic in illegal guns, which our colleagues cite as the source of criminal gun violence. In opposing the American Rescue Plan, they voted against science. In opposing H.R. 1, they voted against democracy. And now in opposing H.R. 8, they're voting against public safety and the social contract itself. What a moral collapse for a once great party.
The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Ohio.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yield a minute and a half to the gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Biggs.
Gentleman is recognized.
I thank the gentleman, and I thank you, Mr. Speaker. You know, last 2 weeks the majority has attacked the First Amendment, and now they're attacking the Second Amendment. H.R. 8 will not save lives. As Justice Scalia noted in his decision in Heller, the Second Amendment does not give Americans a right. It protects a pre-existing right, and that right shall not be infringed. H.R. 8 would not have prevented recent shootings. In Parkland, the shooter acquired the firearm legally from an FFL after undergoing a NICS check. The same thing in Sutherland Springs, Texas. The same in Las Vegas, Nevada. And the same in Orlando. And I could go on because the list would produce the same result. They got their guns after a background check, including in El Paso. Criminals who seek to do harm get guns, regardless of the new restrictions imposed by H.R. 8. And with very limited exceptions, H.R. 8 makes it illegal for Americans to get a gun if a non-licensed importer, manufacturer, or dealer is not involved. And how will government know if an illegal transfer occurs? Without a registry, this bill is unenforceable. I've heard supporters of this bill say that other countries have similar restrictions, so we should too. And I counter with the fact that other countries do not have the Second Amendment. The Second Amendment was included to ensure that the United States would be different than other countries. I oppose this bill, and I urge my colleagues to do the same, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from New York.
Mr. Speaker, I now yield 1 minute to the distinguished gentlelady from Washington, Ms. Jayapal.
Gentlelady is recognized.
Of H.R. 8, the Bipartisan Background Checks Act. This bill is among the most common sense gun violence prevention reforms, requiring background checks for unlicensed sellers. This is not complicated, Mr. Speaker. This is simple. Under H.R. 8, people who wish to transfer a firearm would have to visit a licensed firearm dealer to run a background check before the transfer could be finalized. Most of these checks take 90 seconds. 90 seconds to prevent firearms from ending up in the wrong hands. 90 seconds to prevent more of our loved ones from being killed by gun violence. I'm proud to be from Washington State, where voters have consistently tackled gun violence with common sense reforms, passing one of the first, most comprehensive background check laws in 2014 and raising the legal age to purchase a semi-automatic rifle to 21 in 2018. Let's do this, Mr. Speaker, to save lives. Vote aye.
The gentlelady yields back. The gentleman from Ohio.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We yield a minute and a half to the gentleman from California, Mr. McClintock.
Gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, H.R. 8 is brought to us by the same organizations and politicians who've made no secret of their intention ultimately to strip law-abiding citizens of their right to defend themselves. Now, they know they can't do it outright, so they do it through cynical measures like this, which weave a web of laws so intricate that sooner or later everyone can be caught up in them. This law affects not only sales, but any transfer of a weapon for any period of time. Now, a couple of years ago, a 10-year study by Johns Hopkins and UC Davis concluded that California's background check law had no effect on gun homicides or suicides. None. The purpose of this bill is not public safety. That's its deceptive facade. Its purpose is to make gun ownership so legally hazardous, so fraught with legal booby traps and draconian penalties that no honest and law-abiding citizen would ever want to take the risk. Most criminals already get their guns illegally. They're unconstrained by laws like this. This bill is aimed squarely at law-abiding citizens, moving us closer to a society where decent people are defenseless and armed criminals are kings. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from New York.
Mr. Speaker, I now yield 1 minute to distinguished gentlelady from Georgia, Ms. McBath.
Gentlelady from Georgia, Ms. McBath is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. 2 years ago, I came to Congress, and one of my first actions as a member was co-sponsoring this bipartisan legislation that will save lives. I know the pain of gun violence firsthand. 8 years ago, I lost my son, Jordan, a victim of a gun in the wrong hands. With this legislation, we empower law enforcement to keep guns from those who might do harm by simply requiring a background check whenever a gun is sold. This is common sense legislation that will prevent more families from knowing the pain of losing a loved one to gun violence. But just like 2 years ago, our vote today is beginning, and it's definitely not the end. And again, passing this bipartisan common sense legislation, we call on our colleagues in the Senate to do what is right to keep America's families safe. And I am proud once again to stand in support of this legislation as a survivor of gun violence myself. Congress's refusing to pass this vital legislation would be America's shame and burden for generations to come. And now yield back the balance of my time.
The lady yields back the balance of her time. The gentleman from Ohio.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would yield a minute and a half to the gentlelady from Colorado, the co-chair of the Second Amendment Caucus, Ms. Boebert.
Gentlelady is recognized.
Thank you, Ranking Member Jim Jordan. I was raised, Mr. Speaker, in a Democrat home, so I understand how these policies are deceiving. I understand that we're told guns are scary. That's what we were told, and that's what we believed, because we trusted the people that we voted for. But just as most things in life, I grew up and learned that there's a better way to live. I was ignorant to firearms and the proper use of them. When I became a business owner, I needed to protect myself. There was an altercation outside of my restaurant where a man was physically beat to death. There were no weapons involved. He was beat to death by another man's hands. I have a lot of young girls who work in my restaurant, and we needed an equalizer. I'm 5 foot tall. I barely weigh 100 pounds. I need something against a stronger potential aggressor to defend myself with. Talk about women's rights. Don't take my right away to protect myself. I mean, seriously, what are we doing here? I ask the supporters of this legislation, who do you think you are to disarm Americans and leave them vulnerable without help. You want to defund our police and yet leave us without a way to protect ourselves. Our founding fathers gave us a list of items and said, don't touch these things. And I'm telling you,
Gentlelady's time has expired.
keep your hands off.
Gentlelady's
of
time
our
has expired.
Second
Members
Amendment.
are reminded to address their comments to the chair. The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I now yield 1 minute to the distinguished gentlelady from Pennsylvania, Ms. Dean.
Gentlelady is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I am assuming our colleague on the other side of the aisle can pass a background check, so she will have no inability to have a gun. I rise in support of H.R. 8, the Background Check Act, because even as we manage a deadly pandemic, gun violence continues to plague our nation. Every year, more than 130,000 people in this nation are victims of gun violence. Some 38,000 dead, another 100,000 caught in the crossfire. In my home region of Philadelphia, 2,244 people were victims of gun violence in year 2020. Death by guns doesn't mean only murders. Sadly, it also means death by suicide using a firearm, which was the cause and the case in 62% of Pennsylvania's gun deaths last year. This is a public health crisis. The Background Check Act requires a background check for all gun sales, no loopholes, no backdoors. A common sense solution supported by a majority of Americans, including 89% of Republicans and 87% of gun owners. Let's find the courage to address the crisis. Let's save lives.
Gentlelady's
Let's pass
time has
the bill.
expired. Gentleman from Ohio.
Mr. Speaker, maybe the previous speaker talked about the increase in violent crime in her neighborhood last year. Maybe if Democrats actually supported our police and not supporting defund the police, maybe that wouldn't be the case. I yield a minute and a half to the gentlelady from Arizona, Ms. Lesko.
Gentlelady is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Jordan. Mr. Speaker, I rise in opposition to this bill. H.R. 8 is an assault on our Second Amendment right to keep and bear arms. The bill turns law-abiding citizens into criminals by subjecting them to criminal penalties for simply lending a friend or a neighbor a gun on a temporary basis. Additionally, the bill will inevitably lead to a national gun registry because without a registry, the government has no way to implement this legislation. This bill is certainly a slippery slope. Most alarmingly, this bill does nothing, absolutely nothing, to stop criminals from obtaining firearms. According to the Department of Justice, less than 1% of criminals in prison who possessed a firearm during their offense obtained the firearm from a licensed dealer, meaning criminals would still have access to firearms under this law. This bill is just the first of many steps to take away our Second Amendment rights. I urge my colleagues to vote against this bill, and with that, Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
Lady yields back. The gentleman from New York.
Mr. Speaker, I now yield 1 minute to the distinguished gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Neguse.
Gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Neguse, is recognized.
I thank the chair. Mr. Speaker, I rise today for the more than 100,000 Americans who every year are impacted by gun violence. And I rise today to give voice to the overwhelming majority of the American people who support universal background checks. Communities in Colorado have experienced the tragedy and the grief of gun violence far too many times. Columbine, Aurora, Highlands Ranch. Enough is enough, Mr. Speaker. We have lost too many parents and friends, neighbors, students, and children to gun violence. This Congress must act, which is why I support H.R. 8. We must act on gun violence, we must pass H.R. 8, and we must send it to President Biden's desk. Thank you, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Ohio is again recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I will yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Klein.
Gentleman is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Enough is enough, which is why I rise in strong opposition to H.R. 8 and to offer a motion to recommit the bill. This bill is nothing more than a coordinated effort by the authoritarian left to strip away the constitutional rights guaranteed to Americans by the Second Amendment. Instead of criminalizing the innocent actions of law-abiding gun owners, American citizens, we should be focused on stopping real crime in our local communities and enforcing the laws that are already on the books. One way we can do that is by ensuring that ICE is notified when unlawful aliens attempt to purchase a firearm illegally. The FBI reported just last month that NICS had over 10 million people listed as an illegal alien. In fact, this ranks as the #1 prohibited category in the FBI's NICS indices. Since 1998, over 28,000 illegal aliens have been denied a firearm after failing a NICS check. With over 2,700 in 2019 alone, this means over 28,000 criminals have been allowed to stay in the United States when ICE should have been alerted about their criminal acts, but were not. H.R. 8 fails to do anything to prevent crime, which is why I'm offering this motion to recommit so our nation's laws are enforced. And if you will recall, this MTR passed in 2019 with a strong bipartisan majority. Mr. Speaker, if we adopt the motion to recommit, we will instruct the Judiciary Committee to consider my amendment to H.R. 8 to ensure that the FBI alerts ICE anytime an illegal alien is denied a firearm because of NICS. I ask unanimous consent to insert the text of the amendment in the record immediately prior to the vote on the motion to recommit, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back the balance of his time. Without objection, the gentleman from New York is now recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I now yield 1 minute to the distinguished gentlelady from Massachusetts, Ms. Clark.
Gentlelady is recognized.
In 2016, after the tragic Pulse nightclub shooting, I, with my colleagues, sat in protest on this very floor with our friend, the late Congressman John Lewis. And on that day, Congressman Lewis told us, "We have turned deaf ears to the blood of the innocent and the concern of our nation. We are blind to this crisis." 7 years later, we haven't.
Hello and welcome to the Nomiki Show. I am Nomiki Konst. The crisis of Governor Andrew Cuomo shows how much the political landscape in New York is changing. If we had not broken Cuomo's cynical deal with the Republicans and the right in the state Senate, the Independent Democratic Conference, the IDC, Andrea Stewart-Cousins would not be the majority leader of the Senate, and she would not be there to hold him to account and demand that he resign. Keep that in mind. Keep looking down the road. Keep remembering that Andrew Cuomo's political destruction is actually not an end in itself, as tempting as that may be. The goal is to push New York back into the ranks of great progressive states, to rise above the recent years of corruption and cynicism and bring back the legacy of Al Smith and Franklin Roosevelt. You know, we, New Yorkers, invented the New Deal and put it into action first in New York. There isn't any reason why we shouldn't invent the Green New Deal and put it into action first in New York. Well, there actually has been a reason. His name is Andrew Cuomo. Most of you are probably not as immersed in New York politics as I have been for the last several years, bless you. So what we're going to do is we're going to do a quick catch up. Governor Cuomo has been rocked by scandal, much of it outright corruption, old school pay-to-play scandals. His closest advisor, who he called his brother, Joe Percoco, went to prison for this, deservedly. He's sitting there right now. Yet Cuomo seemed to float just out of reach. Maybe things moved so fast, or New Yorkers didn't have the time to understand. Maybe it was too complicated. Maybe it was too upstate versus downstate. Or maybe simple graft just doesn't offend people the way it should. And now Cuomo has two new scandals, and they are about things that are both easy to understand and to be outraged about. To sum it up, if you didn't kill your grandmother at a nursing home and then lie about it, he was busy hitting on your daughter. In politics, those are the offenses that stick. So Cuomo is desperately trying to save himself. A guy who never cared about fairness or due process is suddenly urging everyone to wait and see what the investigations find. He didn't want the investigations, and now he wants to drag them out. He'll use whatever works. Everything is just a tool to him. He was against the investigations until he wanted the investigations, now hoping to be saved by the pre-existing American political condition, the short attention span. So I did say investigations, plural. It never rains until it pours. The first investigation is looking at the deaths in the New York State nursing homes. It isn't entirely clear whether the governor's actions at the height of the pandemic made the death toll worse, but it is entirely clear that when his actions were criticized, he lied to make the death toll look smaller. This is major malfeasance, to say nothing of hypocrisy on steroids. This was Mr. Follow the Science governor, give the people the facts, manipulating the data to make himself look better, or at least less bad. In the middle of that scandal, 6 women have now come forward to describe the governor's miscreant come-ons. The Attorney General, Letitia James, has set up an investigation of that. Bullying and harassment are basic behaviors of Andrew Cuomo. Doesn't matter what sex you are. What this adds is sexual suggestiveness when the harassment involved younger women, most of them on his staff. Either of these scandals could, on their own, justify his removal from office. But as often is the case in politics, and is always the case in New York politics, it is important to ask, what's really going on here? Or at least, what else is really going on here? What's the subtext? This is budget time in Albany. It is a tense time when everyone tries to leverage all of their advantages. Well, the political map has changed and is continuing to change. The IDC is out, so Andrew Cuomo can't use them as a buffer against progressives, against downstate Democrats. Progressives have more real power than at any time in years, and the neoliberal governor has less. He's weakened. His approval ratings are shockingly low. We are already hearing suggestions for how this new dynamic may be used to further progressive causes. A wealth tax or a billionaire's tax, for example. Cuomo has outright opposed this. He says he is worried that, the billionaires will leave, and go somewhere where there's lower taxes. Although, if I were him, I'd be more worried that they will leave out of embarrassment for being in the same state as Andrew Cuomo. But in any case, a weakened governor may not have the clout to stop the newly powerful state Senate Democrats from imposing this tax. Cuomo is hoping this will create the rationale for keeping him on as governor, a trade-off. You can have the wealth tax and I can keep hitting on my staff or something like that. So the wealth tax could save him. But what could make him resign? Honestly, at this point, the only way I can see him stepping down is if more women come out, worse stories, and Biden speaks out. The leadership of both the Assembly and the Senate have called for his resignation, among dozens of other lawmakers. He's garnered a list of elected women to respect Attorney General James's investigation and stop calling for his resignation. It's distraction. This is New York politics, where Albany and scandal go hand in hand. So stay tuned. Something tells me that this is just going to start to heat up. But in the meantime, we have a wonderful show today. The discussion of Andrew Cuomo will be front and center because Janice Dean is our very special guest. She is the senior meteorologist at Fox News, and she led the outcry against Cuomo's handling of the nursing home safety during the pandemic. She was breaking it open. Also, Armand Aviram is here with Jordan Zakarin to discuss who is being left behind as we build back better. And why is the Lincoln Project such a hot mess? And my favorite, did you know that before she took on the British royal family, Meghan Markle was calling out corporate America for sexism when she was a child? We have that and much more for you. Stick around. Right after this break, we'll be here with Janice Dean. Welcome back to the Nomiki Show. This is our special New York Cuomo Day. I think we're doing this once a week now. Janice Dean is the senior meteorologist for Fox News, and she is the author of Mostly Sunny and Make Your Own Sunshine. I love that. It's so positive, too. It's
Hi.
like what we need right now. Hi, Janice. How are you? It's been a while.
I know. It's nice to see you.
Nice to see you as well. So I really, like, I have to hand it to you. Andrew Cuomo has had so many scandals, very serious scandals over the last, decade and more actually. And they don't seem to stick. So somehow you were able, you did not let down. You kept pushing around this nursing home scandal, which hit you closely. But I just want to start off with why do you think it's sticking right now? I mean, he's like Teflon.
That's a good question. A lot of lawmakers and reporters in Albany called him the Terminator when I first started speaking against him, saying, good luck with that. I think there's enough people standing up now that others feel safe. I feel like, the fact that we've been shouting for 10 months now about the nursing homes, and now we have brave women standing up about his harassment and treatment. And, I have heard from many people that he has been, this has been his MO from day one, just bully, somebody who, exerts his power over people, wants them to feel small. So it's all part of the same package, and I think people are starting to finally feel there's a safe place to stand up and say, we're not going to take this anymore.
So let's talk a little bit about your connection to this story, this nursing home scandal. Your two members of your family passed away in nursing homes in New York. Can you tell us a little bit about what happened?
Sorry, I'm looking over here because I think one of my kids just, hi, I'm doing a live interview. Okay, I'll see you later. Okay.
It's the norm. We got it. Remember in the old days, those moments would go viral, and now it's like everybody's day.
And I said, I'm like, hey, I'm doing this interview on TV and don't come downstairs. And hi, mom, how's it going?
I get dogs.
So forgive me.
It's all good.
Okay. So yes, we lost my husband's parents. They were in separate elder care facilities. We lost his dad first in late March. We didn't even know he was ill, and we were in quarantine. We couldn't see him. He was more sort of advanced with his health conditions than my mother-in-law. And he was in a nursing home / rehab to get him in better health to join my mother-in-law in the assisted living residence. So that was the plan. We had a place close to us on Long Island, and they weren't there for very long either. This is a decision my husband struggled with his sister-in-law for, at least a year. Their health was failing them. We tried to bring aides into their 4-story walk up in Brooklyn that was rent controlled. And it just wasn't working. So we put him in the nursing home rehab to get him in better shape. And his mom was in the assisted living residence, which she saw, by the way, and agreed to and liked it and knew that they were going to take care of her. And then we got a call late March on the weekend. And the person on the phone said, your father-in-law is not feeling well. And then 3 hours later, we got a call saying he was dead. We didn't know he had COVID, didn't know he was sick, didn't know he was running a fever. We didn't even know that he had died of COVID until after we saw the death certificate.
And were there other people in the facility that also had COVID?
I believe so, yes. Yeah, I mean, we still don't know all the answers. We've tried to get them, but the nursing home hangs up on us. So.
What?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, my sister-in-law has been very active in trying to get answers, but
oh my God.
Yeah. There was a red flag after the fact when I remember getting a phone call, my husband getting a phone call saying that they were going to move his dad to another floor so that they could bring more people in, but they never told us they could potentially be infected patients. So
I see what you're saying.
Yeah. So, after he died, and I'm seeing all of these news reports about putting the infected patients into nursing homes and then the cover up of the numbers. My mother-in-law died about 2 weeks later around Easter, this time last year. My husband had to tell her that her husband had died. And she got sick in her assisted living facility and was transported to the hospital and died in the hospital. And that was around Easter. So we weren't going to be vocal about this. My husband's a private person. He is, the last thing he wants is any kind of attention on him or his family. But because we weren't seeing the reports in the news, and instead we were seeing the pandemic prince on television being, crowned like the best thing ever, when it comes to the pandemic. And I saw the reports about the COVID patients and his mandate for 46 days being put into nursing homes. And I saw the reports about not counting those that died in the hospital. And then I saw him on CNN with his brother joking around and laughing. And that was kind of the last straw. When I saw the big cotton swab interview with him and his brother joking around, that's when I said, it's time to tell my story because nobody is going to ask him anything.
When your mother-in-law passed away, was it connected? Do you have any sense of where she was? It just in the facility? Is that how prevalent this was? That every elder care nursing home facility was just, unfortunately, COVID was spreading?
Yeah, I don't know what happened with my mother-in-law. She did complain that people were coming in and out, not washing their hands and that kind of thing. But we'll never know. Yeah. We'll never know.
Unbelievable. So when this all happened and you were seeking answers, was there any sense of like the numbers not being accurate? I mean, where did it go from realizing, because remember we were all watching TV. I mean, I live in Queens. The hospitals were jam-packed. There were trucks on the street, holding bodies in air-conditioned trucks. So it was almost too difficult to process what was happening, to everybody in New York and everywhere, to some very unique cover-up. And like, at what point did you realize that what was being projected in the public was not actually was happening in the nursing home and elder care facilities?
Mid-May, when the Daily Caller was the first to report the fact that they were not counting those that died in the hospital.
How did they know?
How did they know? They did their own investigative reporting that the governor and his health department were not counting those that died in the hospital. And then there were press conferences that the governor would have, and he was questioned on that. And, he sort of brushed it off. And for me, it's like, well, if there's a car crash on the highway and the person dies in the hospital, is it a hospital death and it's not a car crash? That's
Right.
what they were essentially doing. So I remember seeing that report. And then from there, I started seeing more reports from the AP, and there were, Albany reporters were doing this. And then when I went and did my first interview on television, I did talk about that my mother-in-law's death does not count because she died in the hospital.
Interesting. Wow. So when you started speaking out, did you demand that Cuomo respond to you? Was there any sort of interaction with the administration?
Early on, I got an email from a friend who knows the family very well. I don't want to give out the name who it was, because you'll be like, oh, they know him well. And their email said, I'm really sorry for your loss. This is an incredible fight that you're fighting, and watch your back.
Whoa.
Watch your back. Mm-hmm.
Not as a threat from them, but more like, this is what you're going to expect.
This is what you're going to, this is what you're going to deal with. And then when I would do interviews, they would always, Fox would always ask for a response from the governor's office. And Richard, as a party, a couple of times said, well, yes, his spokesperson would say,
pleasant guy.
Oh, we could have a whole show on that. He would come back with, well, ask her where they died and the date that they died. Like, I don't believe you. Give me some proof.
Wow.
Sort of, let me see their death certificates. So that he said that a couple of times. And then when I think the Daily Mail did a story and asked for a response, he said, well, the last I checked, she's not a credible source on anything except maybe the weather.
Oh my goodness.
So no.
So you don't have a lived experience. You can't share your side of your personal story at all and call for an investigation anyway. Interesting. So has there been pushback? I mean, have they done anything other than, the typical berating?
The typical berating. And, I've heard enough stories from other people. Ron Kim and I know each other. We've known each other for many months now. Mm-hmm. I was actually supposed to speak via Zoom in Albany when they had the nursing home hearings in August. Right. I was supposed to speak and tell my family's story. I was supposed to get an invite on the Friday beforehand. It never came. And then I inquired as to why suddenly I wasn't getting an invitation. And they told me that the Democratic lawmakers were uncomfortable with my appearance, uncomfortable with my story. And so I wrote about that. I wrote an op-ed about that. Why can't I tell my story? I'm a person who has dealt with a tremendous loss and two family members in nursing homes, and I want my voice heard. Mm-hmm. And they tried to sort of make up for it. The Republican lawmakers had a makeshift Zoom session a week or so after that. And Ron Kim was the only Democrat that showed up to hear my story. So, he and I have become close that way. And he had an uncle that died in a nursing home. And I know he's talked to you. So, and he's been incredibly brave and stood up to this governor. And I think it's pretty well known what he's like, and that this has kind of been his MO from the very beginning.
It's interesting that you say that, because so now there's this dynamic in that August meeting you were talking about. It was the meeting where Melissa DeRosa, his she's arguably the second most powerful person in the state, not elected, but she replaced Joe Prococo, the guy who's in prison, just to wrap it around. But Melissa DeRosa and her parents are lobbyists. So Melissa, sort of spoke freely about the numbers, and that's when the story broke open. But that was in August, and there was this period where like nothing seemed to, it was just you out there banging the drum, going to the press, courageously doing this. What was it about it coming out recently from that meeting in August? Like, were there dynamics at play? I mean, I'm also surprised like the Republicans didn't jump on board with some of the Democrats.
Mm-hmm. They were trying. I think there were some people that were trying. I almost did give up. It was in December, and there's only so many op-eds I can write by myself. There's only so many times I can go on Fox and Friends or Tucker Carlson and tell my story. And I remember I got a tip from an official at the DOJ. And I thought to myself, well, wow. I'm not an investigative reporter, but I am going to write sort of the opus of op-eds, from the very beginning of how this happened to where we are now with this piece of information that I got from a senior DOJ official, which was, he told me on the record that they had not received any information from the Cuomo administration from October. So basically, the DOJ was investigating Cuomo and they weren't giving them any information. So I thought, okay, I'm going to use that piece of information to write this op-ed. And then Christmas came and I wrote it, and then I published it in January. And I said to my husband, I said, this is probably the last thing I'm going to write because I don't think anything's going to happen to this governor. And then the Tish James report came out. And that was that was like, oh my goodness, and her conducting her own investigation and finding out that the numbers were, 60% less than what was thought to be the real number. So the fact that she released that, a Democrat, and a 76 pager of they're not telling the real facts when it comes to the numbers, and the March 25th order might have had something to do with the fact that we had close to 15,000 deaths.
Wow. And as of today, do we have a more accurate sense of how many deaths there have been in nursing facilities?
Well, it went from 6,000, which was what the governor was saying for months, when he was going on his book tour.
Right.
He was using false information that whole way through. Like they would, if he was asked the nursing home question, he would say, oh, well, we're 45th out of 50 states when it comes to the nursing homes. Like he was clearly using that false data to make himself look better. And that's why I say his book should be used in a court of law, because it can be used against him. But the fact that she issued that, and now the numbers I believe that they've released are over 15,000 dead.
Jeez.
I actually think it's more. More.
Probably. Yeah. Now what happens? So there are these two investigations in Attorney General Tish James's office, one involving sexual misconduct. But you mentioned the DOJ. Is that going somewhere? Is there anything else at play?
That's a good question. And that was one of my main reasons for writing the op-ed in January, was to sort of say, please don't let this be brushed under the rug with this new administration. Please don't do that. I'm not sure. The last I heard, I think Jen Psaki mentioned that they were kind of not really paying attention to it, but that was before, the dam broke on all the other stuff. So I think they should probably continue that DOJ investigation. Now we have a federal investigation in Brooklyn that's going on, and an FBI investigation in New York. So two investigations that are based in New York State.
And they're all rooted in this scandal in particular.
Yes, the nursing home scandal. Yep. And the fact that the governor has lawyered up for nursing homes and not the other stuff, leads me to believe that the nursing home issue is a big deal, and he needs to, make sure that he has a lawyer.
Yeah, of course. So that's interesting. What is the FBI's angle on this, and how is it different than the other investigations?
Well, I think FBI is probably more criminal behavior. I'm not, this is not my wheelhouse, but I'm assuming that the FBI is probably more criminal. And if there was obstruction of justice, if there was really criminal behavior going on, like maybe the fact that what I've heard, you mentioned hospital lobbyists, there have been reporting that instead of basing his decision to put COVID positive patients into nursing homes on science, he was basing it on hospital lobbyists and people in the hospital industry saying, we don't want these patients in our hospital. They're not top paying with the Medicaid and Medicare world. And that there might be a money exchange between hospitals and nursing homes. I mean, and this is what Ron Kim has kind of been, flagging, is the fact that there was blanket immunity placed on for nursing homes just a few days after that mandate. Why did he give blanket immunity after that? I call it a death warrant. And there might be a monetary transaction between, putting patients into nursing homes. I heard that they got double the amount if the nursing homes took them. So while nursing homes, a lot of them were raising the alarm saying, we can't take these patients. We just physically can't. If you look at the language of the March 25th order, they kind of didn't have a choice, and they couldn't test them beforehand. They couldn't discriminate. They couldn't discriminate against the patients. They could not test them to see if they had COVID or not.
Unbelievable.
It is.
Janice, I don't know where this is going to go in the next few weeks, days. We have no idea. But is there anything that you wish would still be looked into or that hasn't been addressed involving this crisis?
They have to keep on the nursing home issues. I know that the other stuff is salacious, and no woman should ever be put in a position of, being harassed. Mm-hmm. And it's part of him. It's part of what he's all about. He's about power and intimidation. And I believe these women, I believe them. But it's getting headlines, obviously. And I've always said, whatever makes him resign, I don't think he's going to resign, but whatever puts pressure on him, I'm good with. But don't forget the 15,000 plus seniors that died, and the fact that we know that they covered up the numbers. Like that in itself, that's criminal.
Right. It's criminal. You're right. We'll see. I don't think he'll resign either unless Biden speaks up. I think that's the only thing.
Yes, I agree. If Biden finally says something like, hey, probably a wise idea to do that. But I think it'll be like he'll be kicking and screaming all the way down.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's amazing how many people have spoken up now. Leadership, assembly leadership, Senate leadership, dozens and dozens of senators, state senators, local lawmakers in New York City, organizations, allies, Tish James, who, he basically recruited to BAG.
Of course.
Talk about because he wanted to get back at Zephyr Teach Out. I mean, it's amazing to see.
Right. It's going to be interesting to see all the puzzle pieces come together. Right. I mean, let's see. Wow. I mean, there is a story here. It's an incredible one. And it's, a lot of it would be Pulitzer Prize winning journalism. I really believe that if people really dig into why this happened and why there was a cover up, I think, it will go down as one of the biggest scandals, certainly in New York State New York State history, but also I think, in the US, I think this is just unprecedented. And plus, New
York has a lot of this.
Of course, I know. I'm learning that it's just mind blowing what has been happening in New York State for all of these years. But one other part of this is other governors had almost the identical mandate as Cuomo. Whitmer in Michigan, Wolf in Pennsylvania, New Jersey's Murphy, and even Newsom had almost identical mandates to put COVID positive patients into nursing homes. So there's also the puzzle pieces there. Why did they do that?
It's such a weird decision to make.
It is.
Yes. Thank you for speaking out and not giving up. And hope to have you back on soon so we can discuss what happens post.
Yeah, I know, right? And maybe we'll have a cocktail at some point when all this is over.
In person. I'm down for that.
Okay,
hopefully it'll be nice outside.
That's right.
Janice Dean, thank you so much for everything, and see you again soon.
Thank you for your interest. All right.
We will be right back with our amazing panel. We have Armand Aviram, who I know very well, but I can't say his name, and Jordan Zakarin here to talk about today's news, including a little Meghan Markle stuff, because listen, there's a story here. It's much bigger than Meghan Markle. It's what it represents. So stick around. It's going to be a good one. All right, guys, you know I'm really into CBD now. I was not before until I tried Sunset Lake CBD. It is a farm-owned company that ships craft CBD products directly from their farm in Vermont to your door. Sunset Lake CBD has something for everyone. They offer tinctures, which I just ran out of last night and have to buy more of, gummies, salves, and coffee designed to help with stress, aches, and pains. It was originally a dairy farm. It was actually the Ben & Jerry's dairy farm in Vermont, and they decided to diversify and grow premium hemp. All customers support sustainable agriculture that enhances rural communities and creates meaningful employment in the communities. Their minimum wage is $15 an hour because they're ethical, and employees own the majority of their company, and they support independent media like our show, the Nomiki Show, the David Pakman Show, and those guys over at the Majority Report, those people. But seriously, Dorsey, I know you've been using the CBD products. I'm a big fan of the gummies. I ate a few too many at once. Doesn't get you high or anything. It just like really mellows you out. But you know this, Dorsey, I get migraines, and I also had a back injury a few days ago that I was trying to work through, and I put the tincture in my tea, and it was, instead of using like ibuprofen or painkillers or something, it made a huge difference with my back. I don't know. What do you like?
I'm out of my tincture too, almost. I think I have a couple of drops in there, but yeah, the tincture is the way to go when it comes to like loosening up the back or whatever. I went out to play some hoops on a nice day the other day for the first time in a long time, and I was pretty stiff. And afterwards, instead of down some Advil, just decided to get the rest of the tincture out of the way, and it just it makes a world of difference to loosen you up a bit after like a lot of working out, a lot of exercising. That's what it seems to be working the best on me, and for sleep. I love to have
the sleep is great. Oh my God.
Right before bed, and it just kind of mellows you out. And I don't know, anytime I have a little bit of anxiety, sometimes if I'm a little stressed about the show or something, I'll have a gummy before the show and just kind of like, right,
that's what it is.
I don't have to really worry about that. Yeah, I'm just like, don't worry about that. Not a big deal.
Yeah. The fudge, that's the other thing. My mom has been eating the fudge like crazy. It's a great product. I used to, when the CBD thing started, the trend started, I bought CBD and I just didn't feel like it was making a difference. I would get lotions and tinctures. And this is, not only does it taste better, the tincture I was like a little afraid of at first. It has like a really nice flavor, very light flavor. And I met up with my friend who was in town, and she was jet lagged. And so I gave her some of the tincture, and she was like, oh my God, it was the most amazing sleep she's had in years. So listen, we're fans. You got to go check it out. But you can go to sunsetlakecbd.com and use the promo code NOMI, N-O-M-I, for 20% off of your entire order. Sunsetlakecbd.com, promo code NOMI, N-O-M-I. Make sure to support. They're good people. They're progressive. They support independent media. We love Sunset Lake CBD. All right, everybody, we'll be right back with our amazing panel. All right, welcome back to the Nomiki Show. We have an amazing panel for the first time ever, but many years of friendship. Armand Aviram is here. He is a senior media producer for Bernie Sanders. You know that guy, Senator Bernie Sanders. He was also over at Now This. I think that's how we initially met years ago on the campaign trail. And Jordan Zakarin, he runs the Progressives Everywhere newsletter. Thank you guys for joining today.
Happy to be here.
Yeah, same
All right,
here.
so you're gonna have to bear with me because I think everyone's fascinated, but I'm really fascinated with this Meghan Markle thing for a lot of reasons. I think it represents, they're reflecting institutional failures, and we're seeing it like out in the open, just how bad it's just confirming a lot of what we've felt is still there. President in the institution, to see them, just how aggressive they were against her. But I mean, that's happening here in different ways too. But I found this clip today, which I don't know what it says, but I just feel like we need to talk about it. Let's play the clip of Meghan Markle when she was younger.
My name is Meghan Markle. I'm 12 years old. Commercials, they do say a lot of things that most people don't even notice. Mostly like laundry and dishwashing commercials. When we first saw the commercial, I knew something be done because I was furious. Dear sir, last week at my school, we decided to watch the news for social studies. While through the channels, we saw a commercial for the new Ivory Clear dishwashing liquid. In the commercial, they said women are battling grease, meaning only women do dishes. When I heard this, the boys in my class started saying, yeah, that's where women belong, in the kitchen. It makes me feel like they're gonna grow up thinking that girls are less than them. Like boys are better than girls. So I was wondering if you would be able to change your commercial to people all over America. Thank you, Meghan Markle.
3 months after Meghan wrote to the president of the company, Procter & Gamble changed the commercial.
I know it's small. I know you guys are all like, come on, Nomi. But what do you guys, this is clearly hitting a nerve with folks. I mean, she's talked about her union membership and how she would have been protected. Jordan, I know you have some thoughts because you write about this stuff all the time. So,
I think like it's clear that she was not someone who wanted to. I mean, I don't know her. But hopefully I would get along with her better than Piers Morgan. But it's clear that she did not want to marry in. She's not someone who was looking to marry into, I guess, a family that was so obsessed with staid traditions. And what is this? They have a queen, but clearly roles that are not really able to be left behind. I mean, you look at what happened with even Princess Diana, just the small amounts of freedom she wanted was not seemed to not be permitted. So I think that Americans and they're like our interest in freedom and our interest in being able to stick it to the rich. I think people are kind of rallying around her. Even in addition to the stuff that whether it's mental health, whether it's her talking about the suicidal ideation, talking about the race of her baby. I think that we're in a very populist moment, and literally the ultimate I guess symbol of wealth, the British monarchy, being racist and awful to an American woman is going to piss off a whole lot of people unless they're also racist and hate women.
And not to mention that they have no problem defending Prince Andrew, the pedophile. Yeah. So I mean, Armand, I mean, this to me, it's just a metaphor for the you have a woman of color, who came from a working class background. Yeah, she's an actress. Yeah, she's rich now, whatever. But she, sometimes, I mean, even Marx talked about this. Sometimes you needed the wealthy, educated person to shine a light on the institutions because they have perhaps more connection to the institution. It's almost like they have to betray that institution to shine a light on just how bad we all knew it was. But the fact that when she married Prince Harry, everybody was praising, oh, look at the monarchy is changing. They're not racist anymore. They're anti-colonial, whatever the bullshit was. I don't know. What are your thoughts? Is it like the Clintons?
Yeah, I mean, I largely agree with your take on it. I think it's interesting to see it from the British point of view as well, where race seems to be an issue in our country that is not as pervasive as it is over there on the other side. And I get where some of them are coming from, where they're seeing this as Americans trying to impose what we're talking about here onto their country. And it's maybe not a conversation they're ready to have at the moment.
Shocked. Okay, I want to move on to some other stuff because the COVID relief bill, $1.9 trillion, the stimulus package that was just passed, it addresses a lot of injustices. We have to give a little bit of credit there. Obviously, it doesn't touch on the $15 minimum wage, but it is remarkably better than what Donald Trump put forward, to support his billionaires. With that being said, those that are being left off, let's show that clip real quick. So the recovery, let's keep that up on screen. This is the New York Times reporting. The U.S. economy has greatly improved from the worst months of job loss last spring, but millions of people are still out of work. The recovery has left some groups further behind than others. Here's a look at what the data shows. Definitely women. Without a doubt. I think that most of us probably aren't shocked by these numbers, and they're probably higher than what is being reported for many reasons. And it doesn't necessarily address the work that has been forced on primarily women on top of it, given at home work, having to leave their jobs, take care of kids, etc. But I mean, what do you think at this point will move Joe Biden? Because much more needs to happen to address that. Armand, I mean, you work in the senator's office. How does Senator Sanders, without giving away his secrets, what is his strategy to move the Bidens who the Biden administration just doesn't, I don't know, it's like they're disconnected from reality or something.
Yeah, I mean, we're actually going through an interesting time now because we have to, Bernie really wants to get out there and sell the stimulus bill. And just from my point of view, as someone who makes his videos for social media, it's not really gaining much traction, in terms of the tweets we're putting out and the videos we're putting out. And, just in terms of what my job is to try to get videos out there that tout the progressive things that are in the bill. No one seems to be paying attention. I mean, we're seeing media viewership across the board plummeting. I think there was an Axios article this morning that said viewership in terms of politics has gone down 28% since Biden has been elected. So we're seeing people really, really check out in terms of the mass layoffs that we're seeing at Huffington Post and other outlets. I think corporate media viewership is really tanking across the board. So I don't know what that says. I think people are checking out a little bit. I think people are really exhausted by the last 4 years, in terms of the pandemic as well. In terms of the strategy, I was listening to a New York Times daily podcast yesterday, and they did an episode on the child allowance, which seems to me, if you're going to point to one progressive thing in the legislation, that's definitely the most progressive in terms of framing it as a universal benefit, which is something unheard of in America, much more akin to a European style social safety net. So I think we need to point to that success as a way to build on that and get the public used to what a universal benefit can bring to society, and then make the argument that, okay, you like that universal benefit, here's the argument for Medicare for all and all these other parts of the progressive agenda. But it's going to be a challenge. I don't think anyone is fooling themselves into believing that Biden isn't progressive. He's not. He's going to throw some bones to the progressive people here and there, but his administration is largely the same old, with maybe a few exceptions around the edges. So the battle continues, the struggle continues.
Jordan, what's it going to take?
I'll have to talk to Joe. I'll give him a call. But I think the thing about this bill is that it was kind of it's like you're patching a hole in a roof, right? I mean, there was a lot of great things, like Armand said, child tax credit and, bailouts for pensions, even for all these union workers who, were about 10 million union workers going to be able to retire in a way they couldn't before, possibly. So I think there's a lot of great stuff in here, but I think it was the issue of, one, the checks, right? They're lower than people thought, and the threshold's lower. And I think that taking out the minimum wage also really took the wind out of the sails, right? So those were these were policies that when Biden ran, or when Democrats were running, they weren't talking about one $1,400 check, which is great. I'm so glad people are getting it. I think that the government should be getting people more money. I think that people should be getting child tax credits every year. Checks should be monthly. But these are not signature policies, and I think Armand said that people generally are paying less attention. I think Trump was like cocaine for everybody, it was this magnet. And so clearly they're going to lose. They're going to pay less attention. I think the fact that, one, we're not going for these big policies that were promised yet, And two, this idea that Joe Manchin and Kirsten Sinema are going to block everything. It's almost like, all right, well, wake me up when that ends, And so I think that people may not have the faith in Democrats at this moment to really get psyched up, because why would they want to be fooled? Or, these things that are passing, while good, again, it's like patching a hole in a roof. And so I think that, putting these things forward, like the PRO Act, right? Putting that sort of stuff forward and pressuring Democrats, I think like making people activists and getting them active, I think could be helpful.
Speaking of PRO Act, let's play this clip of Congressman Tim Ryan losing his mind because we'll get to it. Let's play the clip.
Heaven forbid we pass something that's going to help the damn workers in the United States of America. Heaven forbid we tilt the balance that has been going in the wrong direction for 50 years. We talk about pensions, you complain. We talk about the minimum wage increase, you complain. We talk about giving them the right to organize, you complain. But if we were passing a tax cut here, you'd be all getting in line to vote yes for it. Now stop talking about Dr. Seuss and start working with us on behalf of the American workers. I yield back the balance of my time. Heaven forbid.
So this is fascinating. Tim Ryan is from Ohio. He's a congressman from Ohio running for Senate right now in Ohio. Or has he announced? I think he's announced, right?
I think that was his announcement.
No, I think he has announced. I think I'm on his email list. He does have a good relationship with unions. With that being said, you might recall he challenged Nancy Pelosi for her speakership a few years ago. He's not like the most progressive guy, like just for folks to have a full, but this is about the PRO Act. And, Jordan, you mentioned the PRO Act, which was passed yesterday. It's the most significant expansion of labor rights since the New Deal. The vote was 225 to 206. 5 Republicans joined Democrats in favor of the bill, which is significant. But it kind of shows you, right? Like, why are we having debates over these issues if at the end of the day, when you sit down with a vote, everything should be framed through the lens of labor, no?
Yeah. We were seeing some strong economic populist energy there from Tim Ryan, which I think is great to see from it. I think the Democratic Party generally could use more of that type of energy. If you're going to fight the Republicans, it's best to use some of the tactics that work for them and apply them to our side. And I think that kind of bombacity is helpful to get the message across. That being said, Tim Ryan is against Medicare for all. I just recall the moment of Bernie telling him that he wrote the damn bill and seeing Tim Ryan's face. So, but
I forgot about that.
That being said, I think the best thing that progressives can do over the next 4 years under Biden is to try to rebuild the trade union movement. So we're in a position to, make more demands. The only way we're going to be able to do that is with collective power. And also, I think he did a good job of putting Republicans on the spot there. Going back to the stimulus package, I think the message that Bernie is trying to get across now is like, this is the first time that legislation has been written, at least somewhat with the working people's interests in mind and not just corporations, which the bar has been set really low. So we're achieving something by, going above that bar, obviously not far enough. But if we can frame it as the Republicans really turning their back on working people, and they're going to focus their energy more on the culture war stuff, which may be successful for them in the long run, depending on how things go over the next 4 years. But I think sticking with economic populist message is a winning strategy for anyone, regardless of party.
You're saying that the culture war stuff will, if the Democrats don't focus on labor or do focus on labor, the culture stuff could still win out?
I think overall the country, if you look at it in terms of polling and data, is economically progressive. They support everything on the progressive agenda, but culturally is still very divided, and spending all your political capital on those issues that don't add in, bring anything to people's pocketbooks, it's not always politically advantageous, I would say.
Jordan, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think I agree. The social issues with Republicans and conservatives and Fox News that they're focusing on now, like, unless you were to really sit down and try and understand it, we're talking about is Lola Bunny sexy or can Pepe Le Pew be in Space Jam? These are not issues that are they're doing the transgender and sports thing, but other than that, they're really weird Twitter arcane issues. These are the things that Reddit should be arguing about, not people on the Senate floor or people, on Fox News. And so getting involved in that is just stupid, because I think that I don't know how many people really care about Pepe Le Pew. I mean, I punched a hole in my wall when I found out he wouldn't be in the movie, but that's just me. I agree that, like, Dick Durbin said that they were going to bring a bunch of stuff on the floor and have Republicans block it and hopefully build up some support for Joe Manchin and Kirsten Sinema, seeing the difficulty. So I think it's going to be a slow build, but I think that the more and more that Republicans want to block things, then, Democrats, I think at the very least, are going to try and, pass. They will drop a filibuster, do a speaking filibuster for voting rights. I think that's, existential. Otherwise, they might not even they shouldn't even bother doing anything, because they'll be out of office forever.
Exactly.
I think they'll probably, I don't know about the PRO Act. It's hard for me to say. Armand could do a better job at that, but I think that they will make progress. I think that some things will pass. I don't know how much those things will be like populist enough to continue to get people support, but I think there will be some progress, and hopefully justice for Pepe.
And if anything, I mean, someone could just cut an ad being like, well, your lawmaker was upset about canceling Pepe. You didn't receive your $2,000 check. You didn't, whatever. Yeah. If Democrats had a spine, that's what they should be doing. They should be doing it now. But, who needs Republicans when, even though they got 5 votes from the Republicans, when you have Henry Cuellar, a Democrat, voting against the PRO Act?
So close to beating him last time too.
Hopefully next time. Okay. Real quick before we wrap up, Huffington Post, big layoffs. Armand, you mentioned this. This is just a gut punch to media. The Huffington Post union, they unionized, as many other newsrooms have recently. Today, we learned that 33 of our unit members, nearly 30% of our unit, are being laid off. Our union statement: we are devastated and infuriated, particularly after an exhausting year of covering a pandemic and working from home. I mean, we're all old enough to remember 10 years ago when the first round of after the economic collapse, the media world just like newspapers shuttered. I think like thousands of newspapers across the country, local papers, state house reporters, investigative reporters don't really exist anymore. And in exchange, we got new media like Huffington Post, which built their business off of like free bloggers like myself. I used to do that. I never thought to ask for money. It was like just an honor being on the Huffington Post page. But later it turned into a media company, a very well-funded media company. Armand, you work in this, but you worked at Now This. I mean,
Right.
Where do we go from here if this is?
Well, I mean, what we're finding is that a lot of these media outlets that really built their brand over the last 4 years of just being anti-Trump hysteria, they have to pivot, and there's nowhere for them to pivot to. I saw in the Axios article, like in the month of February during Trump's president, he commanded close to 5,000 minutes of coverage. Meanwhile, Biden has gotten like 1,800, like less than half. So they have a huge problem on their hands. Even for us, I mean, I'm lucky that I don't work for a corporation. I work for the senator, but even so, I'm finding that I used to get millions of views, sometimes 5, 10, 15 million views on a video, but now that was under the Trump, where you had a clear villain to kind of direct all your anger towards, and that's just not around anymore. I think we're gonna see a tremendous amount of layoffs going forward.
And I'm sure Fox News will be doing great, and Tucker Carlson and the Daily Caller and all these right-wing publications are going to be busy talking about like Hunter Biden or whatever, Pepe something. Jordan, I mean, you also come from all of us have a little bit of that media background.
Yeah, we're all survivors. No, I worked at HuffPost. I spent a couple of years there, and that was like kind of my big break. And so I know a lot of people who got laid off. And the thing was, when we were there, I was like a few years out of college, and like people were working for cheap, maybe not for free because they worked there, but working for cheap, working for hours and hours on end. I remember New Year's Eve, I was doing stuff at like 1 a.m. when some like dumb viral thing happened. And, HuffPost does a lot of great work. BuzzFeed does a lot of great journalism. All these places do a lot of great stuff. But at the same time, the stuff that powers them in a lot of cases is, the viral stuff, the stuff that is, can be done by 23-year-olds, 24-year-olds who don't need to make a ton of money. And so I think that as these people got older, people who are I'm 34, people in that kind of demographic who started with me, they command higher salaries, and they, for their work, the great work they're doing. And now they're just going to be, tossed aside for more 23-year-olds who can be, fooled with the kind of family experience that this kind of startups places kind of can offer. Like
the nap pods?
Yeah,
I
the nap
remember
pods,
those.
remember those? Yeah, free snacks.
Free snacks. Bloomberg, they're like, great work environment. You walk into Bloomberg and it's like halls of snacks. Yeah, it was amazing.
Yeah.
And then HuffPost was like, you can go to, literally, there were nap pods where you could go into rooms and take naps in these like eggs. It was so weird.
Yeah, and then if you'll have like 30 emails when you're back. You miss 5 stories, so I can never actually do it. But I agree with Armand. And like Trump was such a driver of media attention, and there's going to be other ways. There's got to be other ways, other outrages, other things that people can do to, draw attention, draw clicks. But the problem with that is, again, it's all based on clicks. It's all based on those kind of metrics. If you want to sell sponsorships, because all the ad revenue going to Google, going to Facebook, going to Amazon, they own 63% of the ad market online digitally. And so if you want to there's a lot of reasons that media is in trouble, whether it's, hedge funds buying up newspapers and destroying them, whatnot. But in terms of digital, if you want to kind of save these websites, save these jobs, save these good journalists, you got to break up these ad monopolies. You got to break up Amazon. You got to break up Facebook. You got to break up Google, because otherwise they're just going to keep sucking more and more of the money and pressing the market further and further down.
And as we talk about on the show all the time, even with our show, the numbers have shifted so much, COVID, post-presidential primary, but also like the algorithm is, and how many people have reported on this extensively. I mean, the woman who was in charge of looking into the algorithm at Google and the bias was fired when she uncovered, oh, your algorithm is biased. It's racist and it's sexist. Our audience is 75% male. And for male hosts, it's even higher.
I mean, Ben Shapiro has 4 of the top stories all the time on Facebook.
Yes, exactly.
And Franklin Graham, like all of America is desperate to hear what Franklin Graham has to say.
Right.
From the grave, or maybe, I don't even know. So it's clear that like the thumb is on the scale in addition to these monopolies. And unless these things can be corrected, I don't know what the future is. I mean, subscribe to my Substack, I guess.
Does Bernie do better than Franklin Graham, Armand?
I think it's also important to note that just trust in media is at an all-time low. I don't know if it's ever gotten back up since like last peak was at like 9%. So I think people are looking for what they deem as authentic voices in the media landscape. And I think Substack is a great new, could be a revolutionary way to kind of fill that void for people. But we're going to continue to have folks just kind of create their own echo chambers even more, unless, like Jordan says, we have some kind of accountability for these big tech companies and these massive conglomerates.
But even with Substack, you have to build your own audience, and that's not easy. If you don't have a name, if you don't have a list, and even then the lists they die out after like 4 months. I'm giving you guys all the secrets. It's not easy.
Not at all. Get people to pay even. Oof.
Exactly. You know, Jordan. All right, Jordan Zakarin, speaking of, go check out Progressives Everywhere newsletter. Armand, we're all following your work. I mean, if you're watching this show and you're not following Armand's work, thank you for what you do. Thank you for the explainers. Share them more so more people see them. Thank you for joining. We love having you on for Wednesdays. Thanks. All right, let's do some shout outs. We have Lee Levin, who says, those of us who know Cuomo are not surprised by anything. Thanks for passing the word. Thanks for budget explanation. No problem. Prairie Fire Kowalski from Nebraska is sending some coffee love. Kyler Asado. Ooh, do we think Joe Manchin will vote for the PRO Act considering he comes from West Virginia? I can see it either way, to be honest. I can too. I think it's a great wedge issue for him. I think it's going to be extremely embarrassing and hard to justify not voting for the PRO Act. Professor Harvey K is in the live chat. Thank you, Professor Harvey K, author of Thomas Paine and the Promise of America and so many other books about FDR, Making America Great Again. I don't have them in front of me. Go check out his books. And thank you to Mini Doctors, Mini Docs and Mario for working the algorithms. Huge thanks to YouTube moderators over there at YouTube right now. I can speak. Bob Seed, Choke in the Orb, and Chuck Diesel. And at Twitch, Twitch TV, Nomiki _ show. Wait, what is it? _Nomiki _ show. I never get it right. Thanks to our moderators over there, Dorian Sapiens, A Difficult Truth, Nightbot, Our Means, and Nug Wrangler. Thanks for keeping the chat rooms troll free. I would lose my mind. You do very special good work for us. And send us your addresses at thenomikishow@gmail.com so we can send you some swag. All right, everybody. We will see you tomorrow. Same time, same place. In the meantime, stay in solidarity.